we are continuing our study on Daniel tonight. So if you have your Bibles, get them out. Turn to the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel, we are going to look at chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2. Now, just to give you a little recap from last week, we looked at Daniel chapter 1, and we realized that Daniel was a young man. He was an Israelite who had been captured during the exile. And so Israel had fallen. The Babylonians had come in, conquered the Israelites, and they stole the people away and spread them out throughout the empire so that they weren't going to cause a problem. And Daniel was one of the young men that was captured from Jerusalem and then trained to be a servant in the king's palace. And we kind of looked at that and we saw that even though Daniel was obedient, he still was a slave, and he ended up being a slave in exile for the majority, if not his entire life. And so even though he was obedient, he still was in a hard place, and he sometimes were in hard places because that's where God needs us to work. Tonight we're going to look at Daniel chapter 2. And Daniel chapter 2 opens to another issue that Daniel has to face, and we're going to get into that as we read. We're actually going to skip the first few verses, and we're going to go down. Basically, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of that time, he has a dream. It bugs him, and so he wakes up in the middle of the night, and he's really frustrated by and confused by this dream, and he says to everybody, "Tell me what my dream means." And so we're at verse 4. Daniel chapter 2, verse 4. The astrologers answered, "May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." And the king replied to the astrologers, "This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have to cut you into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubber. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me." Once more they replied, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it." And then the king answered again, "I am certain that you are trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me." And the astrologers answered the king, "There is no one on earth who can tell you what your dream is. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans." And this made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. Boys. Now don't take this the wrong way, but how many of you men, how many of you in this room have an idea of what the frustration the astrologers were facing? Someone looking at them and saying, "You should have read my mind." Okay, well that didn't go over as well as I hoped. Smart. Oh, there we go. There we go. It's just too difficult of a question. But so essentially, we're in this situation where the king is asking, you need to tell me what my own thoughts were. You need to tell me what my dreams were, and then tell me what they mean. And the astrologers are like, we're not in your head. We can't do that. And so the king is making this impossible demand of the people, and then follows it up with this ridiculously intense consequence. Hard demand, ridiculous consequence. He says, if you can't do this impossible task, you're dead. And your families are in trouble, and your houses will be piles of rubble. Impossible demand, ridiculous consequence. Now, I don't imagine anyone's actually ever looked at you and said, interpret my dream or else I'm going to kill you and your family. Okay? But you've probably been up against situations where someone's made quite a serious demand on you, and there have been some very serious consequences to it. Perhaps you've been in this situation with a job, okay, where your employer has said you have to do these tasks in this amount of time, and there is just physically no way for you to do that much work in that much time. And then they put the consequence and say, you do this or you're fired. You do this and you're demoted. And it might not be a time issue. It might be, I want you to reach these clients and get them to do what I want them to do, and you know there's no way you're going to be able to convince those clients to do that thing. It might be having to do with school. Your teachers have these demands on your time, and they want you to do this coursework, and there's just no way that you can get it all done given the resources that you are, and the consequence is you fail. Now, maybe you've never been in that circumstance according to your job, but you might have faced that with money. The bills start stacking up, and then the letters say you need to pay this amount by this date, or things start getting turned off, or things get reclaimed, or your credit goes down, or whatever it is, and you're already working your 2 jobs, you're already saving, you're already trying to pay, and there's just not enough money to go around to everything. And so it's this impossible demand on your finances and a really serious consequence that you're stuck in. This could be something, it might be a relational matter where you've got a friend or family member or spouse that has looked at you at one point or is looking at you at one point and says, you need to change these things about you or it's over. We're done. Or maybe it's not quite like that. Maybe it's they want you to be in 2 places at once. They want you to work and they want you to be home, or they want to you're living in this world where you got to please your in-laws and your own family, and there's these demands and people are getting mad at you, and they just put these impossible demands on you, and hurt feelings build up so much that there's such an intense consequence building. You might even find this not in your life. You might be looking at somebody else's life and see this there. You might have a friend or family member who doesn't know Christ. And you are trying to help them see the light and to convince them of the truth, and you are doing everything you can to reach them and change them. And they're just not having it. And the consequence to them is they could spend the rest of eternity away from Christ. Hard or impossible demands with crazy intense consequences. And you're just stuck there. And so we can kind of relate to what the situation Daniel's in. So let's look at what Daniel does in this situation. How does he handle it? We'll pick up at verse 14, chapter 2, verse 14. When the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" And the guy then explained the matter to Daniel. And at this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. And then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends. And he urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning the mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. And then Daniel praised the God of heaven. And we're going to jump down to verse 24. Now, I'm skipping parts and going over parts. That's not because they're less important. It's just I want to look at a certain aspect of this story, and so I'm going to highlight those aspects. And so 24, then Daniel went to the guy whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream." And the guy took Daniel to the king at once and said, "I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means." And the king asked Daniel, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" As if being able to tell him what the dream wasn't enough. Daniel then replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through the mind as you were lying in bed were as these." And then he goes on to tell the king his dream and interpret it for him. And at the end, the king is just, his mind is blown by how huge of a task this was, and that Daniel was actually able to do it. And he rewards him with great wealth and power, and says that the king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and revealer of mysteries, for you are able to reveal this mystery." And so he actually gives praise to Daniel's God. And so we see Daniel here in this situation. He's faced with this hard task. He's faced with the consequence. And what does he do? He goes to God. He goes to God because sometimes things are only impossible for you. Sometimes things are only impossible for you. You see, the pagans, the enchanters, the magicians, they had valuable insights. If you turn back to verse 11, you'll see they had valuable insight. They said that the only person that can actually reveal this are the gods. But they had something wrong too. They had a valuable insight there, but they also had something wrong. And it's that next phrase. It says, "They do not live among humans." See, the enchanters, the magicians, the charlatans, the wise men knew it was impossible for every human. But they were mistaken to believe that God would not intervene. They thought God didn't care enough to get involved. And so they didn't even bother asking. But Daniel knew the God he served. And he knew that it was impossible for him, but only if it remained his task. Daniel knew that sometimes things are impossible only for us. But when God gets involved, the whole matter changes. The whole issue changes. And if we assume that God won't be involved, I don't think that most of us think that God is not able. I think most of us in this room, at least on an intellectual basis, will say that God is able to do whatever he wants to. Yes? I think the question we have is, will he actually get involved? Does he not dwell among humans? Do we fall into the category, as with the pagans and the enchanters and the magicians and the wise men, that say God can do it, but he doesn't dwell among humans. He doesn't get involved here. This is impossible for us. Or are we going to be like Daniel and say it's only impossible by ourselves, but there is a God who is willing to get involved? I tell you, you've got these situations with your job. I've seen God on multiple occasions create time where tasks are given and there's physically not enough time to get it done, and he actually creates time to get it done. I know that when I was at school, there were several occasions where I had assignments due and there was physically not enough time to get those assignments done. And somehow, there was actually enough time to get them done. Whether that was he worked behind the scenes and a professor, without me even asking, gave a 2-week extension, or I was able to work faster, or whatever it was, he actually created more time to get the task done. Things that I was not able to do. I went to some tests, and I left the test knowing that I probably failed it and ended up with a 97. I've seen God do those things. I've been in situations here in my job where there is no good outcome to these conflicts I'm facing, and I go to the meeting with the person that there's a conflict with, and this conflict is already resolved before we even have the meeting. Impossible for me, but only impossible for me. When you're dealing with money issues, again, I've seen time and again how God is able to pull money out of thin air and provide. I've seen clerical errors come up and disappear. I've seen money that was not expected show up in the mail from unknown sources. I've seen people gain wisdom about their finances so that they actually know how to spend in such a way that the problems kind of end up being taken care of. These situations are only impossible for me. Relational issues, same thing. I've seen God change people's hearts, produce forgiveness and grace in such a way that doors that we thought would always be closed are reopened. I have seen people that were so addicted to a certain lifestyle. Now, I don't mean just like drinking and stuff, but like lies and bitterness and anger. I've seen people who lived their life and defined their life by those things be changed. Not on their own, but because God dwells among humans. There are people in your lives that you've almost given up hope on, that they'll ever come to know Christ. Sometimes it's impossible, but only for you. Because it's not impossible for God. And we serve a God who dwells among the humans. That's why he sent Jesus Christ. And that's why he sent the Holy Spirit. Sometimes it's only impossible for us. And so there's even small tasks in our life where we're facing things that we want to get rid of, we want to change, or issues we want to deal with. Family issues, social issues, personal struggles. And you have fought and you have tried to figure out the solution, and you're trying to figure out what to do, and it is impossible, and the consequence is huge. And it is impossible for you. But sometimes it's only impossible for you. Because it's not impossible for him. And we need to do what Daniel did. And we need to turn to him and ask him to intervene.